Fragile mask. For Marcus Lewis, this day was just another tiny grain in the hourglass of his life. 9 grueling hours spent in a stuffy office, submerged in the monotony of solving other people's financial problems. All the while, his pompous boss breathed down his neck like a serpent poised to strike, setting deadline after deadline, applying pressure, issuing threats, and piling on workloads to nearly unbearable levels. Then came the part of the day Marcus despised the most, the exhausting journey home across the city rush hour, trailing behind it a burden of back pain, heavy eyelids, and a throbbing head crammed with names and numbers. Suddenly, with stomach-churning clarity, he experienced a waking nightmare. His worn-out mind finally gave in, and his head exploded, spraying a gruesome mix of blood, tissue, fragments of skull, and fleshy brain matter all over the train car and his horrified fellow passengers. Most chilling of all were the numbers mingling with the blood-painful, obscene, pulsating digits that looked as though they were made of cartilage, dancing through the air to an inaudible melody, bloody and frantic. Marcus snapped his eyes open and shook his head violently. Sleep was out of the question now, especially not on a crowded train, surrounded by strangers who could be cruel, potentially dangerous. The rhythmic, lulling clatter of the train's wheels seemed to hypnotize him, making it increasingly difficult for Marcus to keep his eyes open, let alone focus them. His head swam, as though he had been dizzied by an unseen force. All he wanted in that moment was to be home, safe and sound, shedding the stifling mask he wore, releasing himself from the fragile persona that weighed him down. Dusk was settling in as Marcus finally turned the key in his front door. By then, he was sweating heavily, breathing laboriously, his body quivering with pent-up tension. It felt like a lifetime had passed since he last found himself at home, enveloped in warmth, safety, and tranquility. The heavy wooden door creaked open, welcoming him with a familiar, comforting sound. Once inside, he stood motionless for a few moments, savoring the sense of arrival, inhaling the comforting sense of his abode. Then, he slowly began to remove his coat, tie, and shoes. His pace gradually quickened, a feverish urgency taking hold, bordering on a sense of exhilaration. He tore his shirt off, ripping a button in the process, but barely noticing. His pants, socks, cotton vest, and finally, his slightly soiled underwear followed suit. The final act of Marcus's strange, frenzied, and almost ritualistic undressing was the careful removal of his gold watch, Street, Christopher's medal, and massive signet ring that he wore at the office. For Marcus, this symbolized a severing of the last remaining chains tethering him to his daytime existence. He placed the trinkets in a tin dish on the small, functional oak coffee table in the living room. The entire process unfolded in eerie silence, as Marcus owned neither television, DVD player, nor computer. In his eyes, all that electronic paraphernalia was a waste of time, designed to distract people from the true essence of life. Once disrobed, he made his way to the bathroom, where he spent an extended period under the shower, vigorously scrubbing his pale, acne-ridden skin with soap, sponges, and flannel, ensuring his smooth, bare skin was free from even a speck of dirt or grime. He dried off with a pink, fluffy towel and calmly headed to the bedroom. This was his personal sanctuary, his haven. As he walked, he hummed softly, delighting in catching glimpses of himself in mirrors along the way. Occasionally, he even emitted a strange feline purr. Once in the bedroom, Marcus sat at the vanity, studying himself intently in the grand, mesmerizing mirror. His fingers traced the velvet smooth skin of his chest, gently caressing his bold, pink nipples, savoring the indescribable pleasure. Suddenly, his eyes widened in horror. Stubble. It couldn't be. No, it wasn't stubble. With relief, he realized it was merely a lone hair, defiantly protruding from his skin, just beneath his left nipple. Who knew how long this uninvited guest had been lurking there? He grasped it between his thumb and forefinger and yanked it out sharply, flinching at the prick of pain, which, oddly enough, he found oddly satisfying. Marcus was meticulous about maintaining the smoothness of his skin, particularly on his chest, and his arms, and his legs. In truth, he despised hair on his body of any kind, especially the tangled, unruly thickets below that tried to obscure his most treasured attribute. That's why he spent, without exaggeration, countless hours each week methodically shaving and plucking every inch of his skin, every square inch, except, of course, for the unkempt reddish stubble covering his neck and the lower part of his face. Despite his irresistible urge to rid his body of unwanted hair, Marcus cherished his beard. It was his final bastion against the outside world, a protective cocoon in which he could find refuge. Marcus opened the drawer of his vanity and retrieved his treasured cosmetics collection. After much deliberation, no shade seemed to quite match his skin tone, he selected the necessary nail polish, lipstick, eyeshadow, and mascara. With precision and purpose, like a true artist, he began applying them to his face, reveling in the process and taking pride in his skill. As he worked on his face, Marcus softly hummed soothing melodies to himself, allowing his mind to wander. The thoughts of numbers, thankfully, dissipated. Instead, his thoughts ventured into the labyrinthine depths of madness. Such is the nature of the beast. He pondered this often. It is said that a true madman is oblivious to his own condition, as the line between fiction and reality becomes increasingly blurred. Marcus understood that his actions strayed beyond the norm, but he had concluded long ago that he wasn't insane after all. A madman wouldn't realize his own descent into madness. He was simply a little different from other men, a complete outsider, even unique. In the worst-case scenario, he envisioned his life as a never-ending path winding through dark, dense forests. Occasionally, he would leave the well-trodden path and willingly plunge into the surrounding black thicket, wandering for hours, exploring its mysteries, before finding, sometimes with difficulty, his way back to the path. He knew it was risky. There was always the danger of getting lost in the undergrowth and never finding the path again. But he admired his own strength and bravery. Furthermore, if he stops exploring, he'll surely lose his sanity. As grim headlines report, many find participating in the relentless rat race an insurmountable burden. Temporary freedom is the answer, the key to happiness, release and indulging one's desires. More than anything, Marcus longed for society to allow people to be themselves. He was exhausted by the invisible chains of social norms that tighten their grip day by day, suffocating him and leaving him as nothing more than a pale shadow of his true self. Yet deep down, he knew his dreams were doomed to remain unfulfilled. The anonymous powers that be would never allow it. Modern society is too obsessed with maintaining a polished facade. People are haunted by thoughts of how their reputation might suffer if friends or colleagues catch them doing something out of the ordinary. Everyone was shackled by the same rigid societal conventions. One day, Marcus would show them how to live by walking into work without his daytime disguise. He'd incite malicious gossip throughout the office, wouldn't he? Who knows, perhaps some of the bravest souls will dare to follow in his footsteps. If so, he would become a trailblazer, a hero. People would remember his name forever, scrawling it in pink lipstick on the walls of public restrooms. The time had come for a deserved celebration of true decadence. He had reached the pinnacle of his true state. Oh my! Marcus slid open the second drawer of his vanity and retrieved his sewing kit, one of his most treasured possessions. Selecting an especially long and sharply pointed needle, he pierced his hairless, ivory-white left thigh, once, twice, 3 times, each thrust pushing deeper than the last, embedding the needle further into his flesh. Blood trickled down his smooth, baby-soft leg and dripped onto his twitching foot. He smiled and moaned, the sensation invigorating him, making him feel alive, free, and powerful. Too soon. Enough. Still completely naked, Marcus rose from the vanity. He felt weak and drowsy. His makeup was nearly ruined by his teary eyes. He walked unsteadily back to the bathroom, where he showered again, carefully washing away the caked blood and smudged makeup. Cleanliness was of utmost importance. When he finally finished, having relished abandoning his usual daily routine, he returned to the vanity. It was already late, and he knew he should go to sleep, but the thought of donning his false exterior again in the morning was unbearable. He tilted his head and stared at himself in the mirror, soon becoming lost in his own bottomless dark brown eyes. His wounded leg began to bleed once more, but Marcus paid it no mind. The bleeding would cease soon, and the wound would heal as it always had. Now was the time to make a bold statement, to unveil himself to the world. He had hidden away for far too long, and it was time to break free. Suddenly, Marcus made a decision. No, not just a decision, an epiphany. The time had come. Tomorrow, it would all end. He would no longer fear the mockery and snide remarks of his colleagues. Why should he? The world belonged to him just as much as it did to them. How did they come to the conclusion that he was the odd one out? Perhaps it was they who were abnormal, suppressing their desires and ignoring their true calling in life. Pathetic losers. He could not remain locked away within those 4 bare walls, drowning in his own miserable existence. Trembling with anticipation and excitement, he lay down in bed with Leon, his special friend. Oh, Leon, you were so warm. The next morning, Marcus awoke very early. This was a special day, and he felt rested and inspired, so much so that he spent over 2 hours in front of the mirror, meticulously checking for any stray hairs on his body, and applying layer upon layer of vibrant, striking makeup, and, of course, he could not resist the peculiar sensation of pricking himself with his precious needle. Perhaps he overdid it, for soon his flesh was dotted with tiny puncture wounds, delivering painful delight, and blood adorned his body with a pinkish sheen. Hundreds of pricks, thousands. What did it matter? It was time to head to work. On this momentous day, Marcus did not take the train. Instead, he called for a taxi and stood silently by the front door, waiting for the impatient honk of the car, with blood seeping from the tiny wounds scattered across his body. The needle still protruded from his bloody navel like a miniature flagpole. He felt weak and had to lean against the wall from time to time, smearing sticky, dark burgundy patterns across it. Fear and anxiety gripped him, but he knew he had to remain strong. He needed to be an example for others. This was the day that would change everything. The day people would talk about for years to come. It was the early hours of the morning, so there were few people around. At least he had his fiery beard for protection, and in one hand, he clutched Leon, his special friend, as a safeguard. To most people, Leon was nothing more than a stuffed bear with speckled brown fur, marred by dried blood and other bodily fluids. People could never comprehend the bond between Marcus and Leon. They had been inseparable friends for more than 35 years. In his teenage years, before Marcus learned to control the raging fury that threatened to consume him from within, Leon had been the only being in the world who truly understood him. In his other hand, Marcus held an 8-inch stainless steel chef's knife, ready to face any bold fool who dared to challenge him or even so much as laugh at him. Today was the day he would make his mark on this world. Thank you for spending your time listening to this story. I hope it made an impact on you. Feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more captivating stories ahead.